Wonderful.
Okay, so Fons, I know that time is tight this morning. So what I propose, I've got a little bit of an agenda that I thought I would share with you. And Larry, if you can help me out by admitting as people come in, that would be great. Because once I share, I won't be able to see anything. Let's see if this is it. All right, so if you can see, I've got a brief introduction. This is how I'm sort of thinking. We'll spend the first 15 minutes because the students have prepared some nice slides for everyone. And then we will look at the final slide of each of the presentations. So for the healthcare team and also for SDG Power of 3. I will show the slides for the introductions for the students. And if the teams could pull up their own slides for their own dilemmas, that would be great. All right, so welcome everybody. Or, good morning, or as I was taught to say in Belgium, goedendag, bonjour. I'm Heidi Thompson, adjunct faculty in the Lacey School of Business, and today we are hosting Dr. Fons Trompenaars, author of 13 books, including the recently released 4th edition of Riding the Waves of Culture, as part of our week-long MBA Global Business Experience. Fons is recognized around the world in his work as a consultant, trainer, motivational speaker, and author of various books, as you've heard, the 13 books on all subjects of culture and business. He's an accomplished business motivational speaker, and if any of you have ever watched his TEDx Amsterdam talk, great sense of humor. Yeah. So we're very excited to have him here with us, and if I may, then I am going to cue up the students, and welcome, Fons.
Thank you, Heidi.
Did I even share that screen? Okay, so there we go. Maybe I didn't share that screen, but there we go. I am now going to share the screen for the students. We'll start in alphabetical order, and we're going to try to keep to the time as much as we can. All right, so sorry, Kimberly. Just as Kimberly said, oh, I'm so well organized, and I'm making sure I find the right slides, right?
Right. Don't worry too much, Heidi. Don't worry too much. Here it's
still
working.
morning.
It's working.
This is great. All right, Sherry, you're up.
Goedendag, ik heet Sherry Crabtree en aangenaam. I work at Butler University in marketing and crisis communications, do project management for video production. And my SDGs, my personal SDG is good health and well-being, number 3, due to health issues for my husband. And my professional SDG, of course, is SDG 4, quality education, working for a university. I also believe SDG 4 is foundational to the remaining SDGs. And my question for you today, looking at you as an expert on what are best practices or what are recommendations that you may have for building government and business collaboration. And then something unique about me in my department in marketing, I work with 2 live mascots, and I work with 2 dogs, which you'll see in that top left corner. And I'm very looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Goedendag, ik Kate Goodyear, aangenaam. Thank you guys for taking the time to meet with us. I'm super excited. We've read a lot of your work so far, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm currently a brand manager for a medical device company in Indianapolis, and I focus on marketing strategy, the new product development, and a product owner of 7 different product families. On the left-hand side, I just have some fun little personal pictures. The first one is my leisure travel in Australia, and then below is my husband and I got married about 2. Importantly, the 2 SDGs I have selected is a personal SDG 3, good health and well-being. And then for my business SDG, decent work and economic conditions. I'm really excited to learn everyone's take on that, because I think that's really going to drive a lot of the change, sustainable growth within these different markets. And then my question that I have for you is, what is your favorite SDG? I apologize if I butchered that. Heidi has tried to help me, so.
You're doing well. You're doing well.
Thank you. Nice to meet you guys.
Goedendag, ik heet Limogene, aangenaam. So I'm a project manager with Siemens Healthineers in the transportation group, working on products A to B all throughout the world, really. My favorite SDGs personally, I'm a strong believer in tackling climate change. And professionally, I work through both 13, but also 12 consumption and production. So my SDG question would be, which businesses are current leaders at balancing these SDG dilemmas that we're going to talk about? International experience, I work with teams everywhere. I'm currently taking on a larger project that has me working with all different regions and colleagues from different cultures and everything. It's been a lot of fun. And then I did a little bit of work with the military in Germany a long time ago at this point. Something unique about me, a couple of years ago, I did get called up for civic duty to serve on a jury for a murder trial here locally. And personally, I have 2 kids, age 6 and 1. You'll see them on the left there. And in my free time, I do amateur strength shows, and I spend a lot of time in the outdoors with the 2 kids.
Great.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Lee.
Guten Tag, ich heet Lori Miller, aangenaam. I work at Eli Lilly and Company as the publication strategy and execution advisor for our COVID therapeutics. So I work with doctors, other prescribers, and government bodies to make sure that we get our information from our clinical trials in the hands of people who need them. So my personal and business SDG is good health and well-being. That's a really big part of my life, both personally and professionally, is to make sure that everybody has access to the healthcare that they need. And my question is, how do you think we can get businesses to prioritize implementing the SDGs in our daily work? How do we make it just part of our daily conversation? Something unique about me is I went to a boarding school for most of my high school years, and that really set me on the trajectory of being the science person that I am today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Goedendag, ik heet Michael Natowski, aangenaam. I am a commercial real estate appraiser working for a small Indiana bank called Centia right now. My SDGs, the personal one that I have a passion for is ending poverty. The more I study and learn about different cultures, I realize I got to take myself out of my first world view here in America and realize that there's a lot of people struggling. We need to lift all those people up. My business SDG is SDG 11. This coincides a lot with my professional experience. It's something I have a passion for. SDG 11 is a very deep and complex SDG with a lot of moving parts, but overall making cities and settlements safe, resilient, and sustainable. My question is, and as you'll see in the presentation, is I feel like I'm missing some stakeholders that are required to meet this long-term goal. I've got a few listed, but I'm looking forward to getting some feedback, and this week has been a big help, so I think I'm moving forward on that. Internationally, my wife is from Spain. We spent a lot of time there. We actually got married in Spain during COVID. None of my friends or family could attend, which was very difficult. But it is live on YouTube. I mean, you could Google YouTube Mike and Elena's wedding and check it out. So personally, we got now a 7-week-old son, Lucas, a couple dogs, and we love the outdoors. Love to golf and run. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
Cam.
Me? Oh, Cam.
Sorry, not Kim, but Cam. Is Cam with us? I can't see the gallery, so I don't know if Cam is with us.
He was earlier.
Right, I'm gonna move down, and if Cam speaks up, we'll move backwards again. He may have been bumped off. He's in St. Croix today because since he couldn't come to the Netherlands, he decided he might go to the islands instead.
Oh.
He might have been muted, but okay.
Guten Tag, Kate Riley Woodruff. I'm a project manager for a global facilities delivery team for Eli Lilly and Company. My personal SDG 2 is zero hunger. I've mentioned in the past, this is just due to my perception and just my life changing with having a 2-year-old son. So I cannot imagine being able to feed him adequately. So that's just something that sticks with me on a personal side. From the business side, my SDG is 12, responsible consumption and production. I also touch this daily in manufacturing as a project manager at Eli Lilly and Company. My SDG question is, how do we sell the business case for a circular economy to short-term oriented companies? As Michael had mentioned, I've learned a lot about that this week, but looking forward to talking about that more today. From a personal standpoint, I love to travel, run, golf, anything sports. As I mentioned, I have a 2-year-old son. I'm married as well. So the top left is a picture of my son and my wife. And then the bottom left is a picture of my wife and I when we used to be able to travel before COVID and having a son. We were in Amsterdam there in that picture. My international experience, work-related, I had 3-week training in The Hague and Rijswijk. I used to work for Shell Oil Company for about 6 years. Leisure travel, we love to travel anywhere we can. Italy, Netherlands, as I mentioned, Switzerland, just anywhere we can get out and about, and hopefully we can start doing that here soon. Looking forward to talking to you guys today.
Great. Thanks, Riley.
All right, let's see if I can drive backwards on this presentation and get to Cam. Welcome back, Cam.
And he was muted, and that might have been the challenge. And
See if I can do it this way.
I just have to say, what impressive slides.
They worked
Very-
really hard on them.
Very, very nice intros.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I
Cam?
can.
Cam?
he said he's going to call in.
Okay, he's gonna
He's
call
on
in,
chat.
Okay.
maybe with his snorkel.
Yeah, he got to go smoke in St. Croix.
Yeah. And if we can kill some time, what a beautiful Dutch you're speaking. Yeah, well done. Even the G, is Cam there? Yeah.
I don't- let me know, anybody, if you see Cam come in, because I can't see the gallery. Thank you, Fons. The students worked really hard on their Dutch in anticipation of coming to the Netherlands so that they could, move about a little bit.
Yeah.
So I said, well, listen, you've worked really hard on it. Let's use it. We're still meeting Dutch people. So,
Yeah,
and
very good.
especially after working on aangenaam. So,
Yeah, Heidi, it reminds me of John Cleese, the comedian
yes.
from Monty. He once said, Dutch is not a language, it's a throat disease.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did give them, I showed them a small video though, when I said, if you can't get the hard G sound, there is a place, Brabant, and there's the southern Netherlands, and of course,
Yeah.
Belgium, which has the soft G.
Yeah.
So I said, it's okay. Dutch people will understand you if you use a soft G and, sort of
Yeah,
aspirate
yeah.
it if you can't quite get that.
Yeah. Like the northern Belgians, they, the more south you go, the softer the G.
Yes, yes, I certainly learned that in several of the words. I used to translate between my Belgian housemates from Bruges or Brugge and Antwerp. Or,
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, here's Cam. All right.
Here we are,
Yes,
Cam.
Hi, Cam.
Thank the Lord. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
That's okay. You just
Sorry,
gotta learn the
all right.
technology. Go.
Yeah, it's awesome when it works. It's terrible when it doesn't. Guten Tag, ik Cam Utter. Aangenaam. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. Born and raised on the east side. I work at Quest Safety Products. We're a full-line manufacturer and distributor of PPE. So as you can imagine, we've been really, really busy the last several months. I'm our e-commerce sales manager, which is just a fancy way of saying that I sell for us on Walmart.com and Amazon.com. Super fun job, and I love what I do. I went to Marion University prior to Butler and got a bachelor's in psychology. My personal SDG, something I'm really passionate about, is quality education. I think that this SDG and achieving this SDG is foundational to being able to achieve all the others. The business SDG that we discussed in our presentations is decent work and economic growth. The discussion question I'll be posing to you, Fons, today is, how do we help businesses effectively quantify and track the progress of achieving SDGs? I think that the SDGs we have in place are awesome, and I think they're great, but I think there could be improvement on the tracking of the different metrics to make sure we know, how are we improving? Are we making progress? Something unique about me, you'll see in the top left-hand corner, I played college football, and I was lucky enough to be a part of 2 national championships during my time. So I got spoiled there. The middle picture is me, my brothers, and my father. I'm a big family man, and the lowest picture there is my mom. She's currently battling stage 4 cancer, so she's my hero. But yes, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us, and I'm really excited to learn more.
Thanks, Cam.
Okay, so we've almost made it within our area. Healthcare is going to be the first one to talk about their slides. Do you guys have that queued up? Or do you want me to pull it up? I can also I have it ready if that's easier.
Yeah, maybe that's easier.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have it, that'd be great.
Yeah. All right. Let me find that area.
Heidi,
Okay,
you
so
could
I'll
always
pull up
make
the
it as a
healthcare
pilot.
one.
Multitasking, you could always make it as a pilot, Heidi. Your ability to multitask is incredible. So,
Okay, I'm going to fast forward, Fons, all the way through because I believe, it's just in the interest of time.
Yeah, and Heidi, and I have gone through them myself, so I know it's a build-up. And like what Kimberly said, what a wonderful way of presenting.
So this is going to be the dilemma, and I'll go straight then to, this is for SDG 3, but I will go straight to the reconciliation slide.
Yeah.
And for our audience, they get to see sort of what, okay, here's the reconciliation slide. All right, who's presenting on SDG 3?
That is me. This is Lori.
Hi, Lori.
So working for a pharmaceutical company, a big dilemma obviously is drug access for everyone versus profits. Obviously, we want as many people as possible to have access to medications, which could mean lowering in prices. But then if we decrease the profits that companies make, we won't have money for the innovations to drive drugs of the future. So how do you reconcile those two opposing forces? So a compromise could be starting the drug development process with less costly partnerships with academic innovators, patient advocacy groups, but that only gets you so far. The expensive part of drug development is the clinical trial work. It's not necessarily the beginning pieces. So potential reconciliation, we've actually seen this quite a bit in the COVID space, is how can we work with government and regulatory bodies on pricing programs? For example, some of the COVID vaccine work and treatments, governments actually paid for the bulking up of the manufacturing materials to disperse the risk for the pharmaceutical companies so that we could do what we do best, which was innovate, drive discovery, but we didn't have that financial risk that usually holds us back. So I think that could be a potential in the future to move forward, is how can we get more of that? But curious if there are any other thoughts you would have in that space.
Very good, Lori. Heidi, would you like me to react immediately?
Yes, I think if we could, I think the model will be that we'll have about 5 minutes per reconciliation. Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's fine. Let me react also, because there are many dilemmas that you go through, and my memory is limited, but I'm sure also from those who listen. First of all, wonderful way of building this up, and what a wonderful dilemma. Let me, and I won't do that with every dilemma, but what I often see as mistakes is that a positive is set against a negative, and they call it a dilemma. That's not a dilemma. A dilemma are always two positives. And what I've seen in the pre-work I did is you did a great job. I also like your addition of the SWOT analysis, which we called stretching, pluses and minuses, but you added opportunities and threats to it, which I really like. Obviously, in the opportunity is already half of the reconciliation. And in the thread very often is perhaps going towards either a non-reconciliation or a compromise. You did it all over all presentations very well. So that's off my chest. And you really did a nice job. My first reaction on this dilemma is, and it came back throughout the dilemmas of this group, is you take out the shareholder, and it's very often, I think, an American issue that the shareholder takes such an enormous space. Now, the last thing I want to say is that I'm against shareholders. You need shareholders, but very often they were taken as the focus on one side of the dilemma. And why I'm saying it, because if you talk about shareholders, you immediately talk about money. And in this dilemma, what we have found is that innovation is not only solved by money. It's very often the human invention. When I wrote my book on innovation, Riding the Whirlwind, I was invited for the presentation in London, the presentation of the book. And it started with a standardized video. And it said something like, yeah, they asked me to innovate and my boss gives me a deadline. And everybody was laughing. Everybody recognizes that. And I thought it's not laughable, because I think the boss is right. Because innovation is not only solved by money, but it's solved by scarcity. And most innovative processes are done in the context of scarcity. Scarcity of money, scarcity of time. When you are under pressure, suddenly you become innovative. That's something I would like to throw into this discussion, is don't only say that money is helpful for innovation, and that's why having lower prices will kill innovation. Yeah. Try also to find reconciliations in creating a culture of innovation, which is almost priceless. It's about the human mind. And it brings me also back to one of the questions that you say, hey, Fons, what is your prime SDG personally? And I think it is number one, but I would like to add a word, namely, and not poverty, but and mental poverty. I think in innovation, we're very much hindered by the bipolar models we're using, ranging from cultural studies, you're either one or you're the other. Myers-Briggs, you're thinking, and that's why you're low in feeling. And I call that mental poverty. For innovation, you need to increase, which you, by the way, did. By the way, don't take my approach as a pure criticism of what you did. I think you did a very sound job in all reconciliations. But this is my reaction to this one.
Terrific.
Heidi, you're on mute.
Shall we move on to the next one?
Heidi, it's mental poverty if you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, it so parallels yesterday's discussion about social innovation, and it's not the technology, it's people. Okay, this is great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good. Very helpful.
All right, so I'll go ahead and take up the discussion next from the healthcare team. Dilemma for SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So the dilemma that we posed here was the conversation of, do you pursue market penetration in currently developed infrastructure environments, or do you pursue development into underserved regions, specifically within healthcare, for expanding patient access and care? So on the one hand, you have focusing on the margin. There are higher margins when you talk about market penetration for currently existing infrastructures. The strengths you have, employment, stronger employment sector. You've got the capital to reinvest, kind of going back on Lori's commentary, reinvest in things like innovation, reinvest in broadening your infrastructure. You have the capital to expand into and have the ability to expand into these underserved markets as well by virtue of the market penetration strategy that's existed for a long time. And then in weaknesses, you have public perception. If you're only focusing on developed areas, you have public perception that you have to consider by not serving markets that aren't as profitable for you. On the other hand, you have building out infrastructure. The strengths to building out that infrastructure and serving these underserved markets are that you have the financial resources to do it, generally in healthcare. These companies are generally not starving for margin at this point. Their financials are very strong. And you also have limited competition. They're underserved because your competitors are not there. And the weaknesses you have there is you have reliance on infrastructure. So if you're talking to a healthcare company trying to reach underserved areas in sub-Saharan Africa, well, you don't have the same kinds of roads, airports, railways to access those markets. You don't have cold chain storage facilities. You don't have a network of doctors and nurses and highly qualified individuals to administer that healthcare. And these are not businesses that healthcare companies themselves are in. So they rely on other industries to be involved in this effort. So a 5-5 compromise that I've mentioned is focus first on the emerging markets to identify hurdles before jumping to riskier expansions. So maybe don't jump into, finding a small village 500 kilometers outside your current infrastructure limits. Maybe focus on those areas that are on the fringe of being served that haven't quite received expansion, and use those opportunities for a lower risk investment to serve underserved populations. And then kind of a 10-10 reconciliation model, explore government subsidies, corporate partnerships, and look to share a risk profile. So one example I pitched out is I'm in transportation, so selfishly I use that model. But there's not a lot of airlines flying into these underserved areas to transport your goods into that location. So what if you develop a partnership with a non-competitor healthcare? Maybe you're in devices and you go to pharmaceuticals or vice versa, and you're looking to split the risk pool by working on expanding with them. Or you're working directly with the transportation business and saying, look, I'll subsidize your infrastructure costs, and then you can serve other customers that are not me, so that we share in the risk in this and you have a wider access to make up your profit margin as well.
Very good, Lee. Very good. My first reaction to this dilemma is, first of all, again, you did a great job like the previous group. I really like the word cooperation with the government in this case, or local governments. It doesn't have to be your own. And I'm really excited by the idea of, because this is a long-term, short-term type of dilemma as well. Like many, there might be something that could be internal versus external control, which sometimes is helpful. Are you driven by the market, or are you pushing something which is good for all? And I personally believe that the subsidies perhaps would not be the right word, but at least government cooperation in terms of approaching the holistic issue, which then in the future will give you enormous amount of underprivileged markets that may become privileged because of the infrastructure improvement. That's one remark. The other remark is that I personally believe there is the majority in this world is not having the right health support, including in well-developed countries like the US or parts in Europe. So what I really liked of your approach is that you also look at the underprivileged that are close by. We don't only have to think about Africa and Asia. There are enormous amount of underprivileged people, not only in terms of health or pharmaceuticals, but also even in being nurtured properly. And if we start there, we can already learn in that process what we could do in other parts of the world. But there is so much to do. And I really liked that little footnote you made. Let's take those who are on the edges close by where we could start and learn. Let me stop here. And perhaps, again, a generic comment on all the dilemmas is twofold. Namely, in step 2, charting the dilemma, we very often say, where are you at the moment? Now, in this dilemma, it's quite easy. You are much more in the market penetration ballpark than in the development one. And why is that so important? Because in step number 5, the dilemma reconciliation, the crucial question is, how can I, from market penetration or through market penetration, help the development process? So if you take now the enormous amount of profit made by the Pfizers and the Modernas and what have you, how could you, with that money, invest into the infrastructure, which will give you guarantees for your next wave of profits, rather than just sending it out to shareholders who will just spend it in increasing their security companies, and I mean security on 2 ways, namely on the street and on their own private properties defense, rather than investing it into which will defend them from security issues in the future, namely in the development of their next profits. And that again is a short-term, long-term type of issue. So let's go back to education and look at how shareholders can be educated to think in long-term rather than the profits of today. But again, enormous inspirations in your presentation for doing the right thing. Thank you for that, Lee.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one, which is going to be SDG 12, reduce. And I'm sorry for the visitors. I'm happy to send these out to you later on if you'd like to have a look. Well, I believe that group. There we go.
Okay, so my dilemma here for SDG 12 was productivity versus finite resources. So on one of your axes here, you have maximum production. So companies want to produce whatever they can. They want to grow their pipeline, increase their revenues. Weaknesses there, obviously exhaust future resources. On the other side, you have saving resources for a sustainable future. So you could reduce potentially your capital. You have positive sustainability. You may have obsolete facilities down the road. There's a technology learning curve with moving towards a different way to produce these products. So there's give and takes on both sides. A compromise would be potentially a production cap. So in this case, you would reduce the amount that you can produce and obviously reduce the amount of natural resources that you use. But I think this is somewhat of a lose-lose scenario for both groups. Companies don't get to produce what they want to produce. They don't get to grow their pipeline as much. And at the same time, we're still using a lot of natural resources in wasteful ways. So more so in a single pass, generating a lot more waste. So a reconciliation here would be circular manufacturing or a circular economy. So we're seeing companies like Lilly and Philips and other companies of that nature start to recycle and reuse plastics, recycle and reuse water, generate some of their waste they can generate into marketable products. However, a question that I've been asking a lot this week, in the last few weeks really, would be how do you start to push companies towards this circular economy? And it may be easier for companies with a lot of resources and a lot of capital to start moving this way. But how do we start to push some of these smaller companies that don't have the capital on hand, don't have the resources on hand, are far more short-term oriented, that want results now, maybe not thinking 10, 15 years down the road? How do we get them to focus on that? So with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts here, Fons.
Thank you, Riley. Again, wonderful reconciliation. And I think the circularity is a nice metaphor to the spiral, the dance between the opposites. And if you have the long-term perspective, I don't think this is a problem. But to survive the long term, you need short-term results. And that is a big issue. In fact, I had the same question as you're asking yourself, Riley, namely, what are the concrete action points you can take to make this happen? And the government might help, not by a production cap. I fully agree. That's really a compromise. Another indirect compliment to your presentation. But governments could make companies force, and they might then perhaps increase some of the prices. But if it's done by all the competitors, that will not hurt at least the industry. It might hurt the consumer, but the hurt need to be taken somewhere. Second point I want to make is what can we learn from metaphors? Metaphors like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, you know, they make sugared water that leads to obesity, which is increasing their revenue at the cost of, in this case, perhaps not the reduction of capital, but the reduction of human capital, namely people getting ill. And if you know the cost that is produced by bad food. So what you see, and again, I'm saying this positively, what Coca-Cola and PepsiCo have done is produce foods that not only is health neutral, no, is health positive. Unilever, for example, is a wonderful example of organizations that have reconciled this dilemma, and it's now paying back. There was a moment Kraft wanted to take over Unilever, and they withheld it because Kraft was in there for making short-term profits. While Paulson, the CEO, by the way, he might have lost his job because of that, defended against the short-term shareholder stuff. And now Unilever is going on the path, like Danone in Europe, in trying to combine this type of dilemma that you have focused on. The point I want to make more in a generic learning is what can we learn from Unilever and from Danone and from PepsiCo, what they have done in reconciling this dilemma. But don't take a metaphor too far. Now, my point for you in general, if you have a dilemma like productivity versus finite resources, try to decrease the level of abstraction, because then you will hit the almost philosophical discussion. What are the action points we can take? Well, if you take a concrete company like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, or whatever, then your action points are much more concrete and much more tangible than if you keep on that level of abstraction. You make yourself a very difficult job in this very generic productivity versus finite resources discussion, right? And then metaphors might help.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
That's great.
So in step number 2, in general, make the dilemma as specific as you can. Yeah?
That's great. All right, I'm going to pull up the next set of slides first to review. Just going to check that I have that right slide deck up. Close that one.
You're doing well, Heidi. You're doing well.
Thank you. Doing my best. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is going to be SDG power of 3, and I'm going to fast forward to the dilemma reconciliations. So we think. We're getting there. Oop. And of course. Okay.
I can pull it up if that would be helpful.
Oh, do you not? Oh, do I not? I'm sharing it. Do you not see it?
It's not moving. It's on.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Let
It's
me
static.
try share again. Okay, how's that?
There
There
we
we
go.
go.
There you go.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank
Way
you.
to go.
Good.
Great.
Sherry, before you start off, you had the best G. I was impressed. Yeah,
The hard. Thank you. I've been practicing.
good. And
Thank
you
you.
had two dogs. Are they English bulls?
Yes, they are. They do work in our office. And, if you have Netflix, there is a show that was produced about them in season 2 that just shows you one small part of the work that we do in my office. So those are my
Well
work
done.
pets. So yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I was.
Go
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, we had two English bulls as well. And unfortunately, although they became old, 11 and a half, but we missed them so badly. They're wonderful dogs. And they show affection by hitting you.
Yes.
Which is great as well. It's a bit like American culture. Yeah.
Yes, they have a unique personality for sure.
You can tell so.
And Sherry, I wanted to ask you why you had Netflix on your page. So now I know.
Yes, we really cut our introductions
Yeah.
tight, so there are hyperlinks in mine if you have the slide deck or PDFs for
Okay.
some more information. So
Wonderful, wonderful.
thank you. Well, if we look at the reconciliation here, and thank you for sharing that you've seen the full presentation.
Yeah.
The dilemma here, of course, the big overarching question is, should education be fully funded by governments or through private enterprise? Private enterprise, of course, including nonprofit as well as profit. So on the one hand, through private enterprise, it's market driven, opportunities for more individualized education. However, it comes with high capital requirements, usually high individual debt and lower equity. When government is involved, then obviously there's less capital to raise in certain situations. There's increased access and increased equity. However, at times it can come with fewer program choices, as we've seen in Germany. So when looking through that lens, we tried to come up with a compromise. And so the compromise in the middle there, you see our trial initiatives driven by businesses may be supported by governments. And for an example of some of those items, I thought of certifications that are created in partnership with universities and businesses to ramp up skills for current employees as jobs and technology changes. More support for apprenticeships or co-ops, which are not universal for all educational institutions. And we're seeing income share agreements between businesses and individuals to help fund that education. So those were some of the compromises. And then looking ahead is kind of one possible solution. I wanted to highlight a situation that my employer, Butler, is involved in. We partner with Next Tech, which is a nonprofit institution that provides computer science education for all what we call kindergarten through 12th grade or primary through high school students in the state of Indiana. And it works with them to break down stereotypes in those fields, and then works with those students throughout the process to introduce them to jobs related in computer related fields within the industry. And so I raise that as one possible solution. I think, it's fantastic. I think it's a Band-Aid, and with government support, we could do more. And so I kind of circle that back to my question then on what are best practices for government business collaboration, because I do work with leadership within Butler, and I'm pleased to say we do have open dialogue with our local and national governments. We've recently hired administration who will focus on global outlook for our university. So just, wanted to get your opinion on this possible reconciliation and what you might recommend.
Very, very good. Very, very good. First of all, I like it a lot. It's very concrete.
Thank you.
You really made Butler an example of this, where I guess it works well. And it shows the reconciliation, namely that the underserved population is served by a partnership with Nextech. So well done. One remark: when I looked at your reconciliation, well, it's a minor detail, but never use a straight arrow, because a reconciliation is a dance between opposites, right? A straight arrow means that you go from compromise to compromise. But again, that's symbolic. Huh? Mm-hmm. And also a helix, a spiral going from one side to the other, has fallbacks. It's the learning curve, it's the mistakes you make. But it also shows that you can have the clockwise helix and the anti-clockwise helix. The clockwise helix starts with the question, how can the x-axis get us more of the y-axis? And the other one, the anti-clockwise helix, in this case would be, how can market-driven individualized learning get into less capital to raise? In other words, it is an invitation to ask those two not and questions, but through questions. Yeah. Now, you always start with where you're coming from. In this case, it might be both. The other point I wanted to make is my personal case. I was sponsored by the Dutch government. No, I must say by the European government, and I'm talking about the late 1970s. So in 79, I was getting a scholarship by the European Institute of Advanced Studies in Management. Thank you very much. Co-sponsored by the Dutch government, but many governments. This was the beginning of the European Union. And they gave me a state, how would you call it, subsidy, grant to study. And they said, but you have to go to a private institution in America. And they chose for me Wharton, which was unaffordable, but because they did it, it was affordable. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, my whole career was thanks to that. And it was a, if you like, state-owned grant that gave me the advice to go to a private University of Penn, unaffordable type of studies. Mm-hmm. And here I am talking to Butler because I went through that cycle. So there are wonderful examples where if government works together with private stuff, then you get a AAA. Mm-hmm. However, the system in the Netherlands is a pretty B plus. It's not an A. You have to go to the private universities in America to get the A plus, and I'm not kidding. But for the large majority in the Netherlands, it's very affordable for 2,000 euros, $2,200 to get a B plus type of education. So I'm not saying that if it's done by the government, it's bad, because there are no, never say no, there are some, but most of them are state-owned universities that gives you a pretty good education. But if you want to excel, so if you look at it at a global scale, at least for Europeans, there is a possibility to do this well. And I gave myself as a personal one, but these are all examples of what you said. Go into partnerships, either with other private companies. I guess Nextech is a private organization, yes. But it could also be with government. And you gave wonderful examples. Let me stop here because I'm repeating myself.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Not enough time for everyone to see everything, but this is the build-up. There we go.
Here we go.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect, no mic issues this time. All right, so my SDG was SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And the question being posed here is, should achieving decent work and economic growth be driven by free market enterprise or government incentives and subsidies? So on one hand, with free market enterprise approach, some strengths would be more consumer sovereignty and less red tape or government regulation. However, there is the potential for unemployment and inequality with employment to increase. On the other hand, if we went to the governmental approach, there's more regulation and policy and things like increased taxes, but there is the additional funding from government, and there can be a increased focus on economic development within communities. So the compromise you'll see here in the middle that we came up with is clear objective-based programs, initiatives driven by businesses and supported by government. And we'll take the line to the solution, possible solution. How do we create quantifiable programs and not short-term solutions? So an example of this that a program that my company currently participates in is HubZone. It's through the Small Business Administration. HubZone stands for Historically Underutilized Business Zone. So these areas have been identified in our community as low economically developed areas. The idea is to put fast-growing, successful businesses within these areas, and for that company to employ 35% of their workforce, they have to come from these areas. And the idea is that as the company grows, so does the economic value and the area around it. And it's kind of like a flywheel. Obviously, there's more business opportunities for our company. When we have the certification, we get opportunities with large corporate contracts because this is a minority certification. So, they have to spend a certain amount of dollars with companies with diverse certifications each year. So we get more opportunity to grow as a company. But as that happens, we also get more opportunity to provide decent work and decent wages to those in low economic communities. So it is a really cool program. However, I would say that, if there's any area for improvement, we've been a part of this program for 3 years now. One thing I think we've lost sight of is, how are we, not the short-term solution, but the long-term? How are we measuring this in the long term? How are we, can we quantify of the 35% of employees we employ that are from these low economic areas, how many were able to maybe move out of those areas and get into better neighborhoods? How have we actually, economically impacted the area? Is there any metric we can identify to be able to help quantify that and make it a long-term approach instead of just something we've done in the short term?
Right. Cam, again, wonderful example of a very concrete example of this dilemma. Yeah. Some generic comments, because you formulated it so well, I'll take this opportunity to emphasize very often the lack of discipline in asking the right question in step 5, at the dilemma process itself. So I very often say, where are you coming from? It could be both sides, by the way. In this case, it could be both sides. But ask the question, how can government-supported focused economic development help us to get more consumer sovereignty and less red tape? And it sounds like a counterintuitive question, but that's because dilemma reconciliations are very often innovative, creative, right? So ask the odd question. So in other words, how can government-supported focused economic development help us to get more consumer sovereignty and less red tape? And vice versa. How can consumer freedom, consumer sovereignty help you to get more government-supported focused economic development? And in that question, now I think you gave a fantastic example of it, but my point is, don't forget to ask that question time and again. Now this is this example, but it's true for any way of getting into a dilemma reconciliation. So that's the point I wanted to make here. Again, use the spiral, not the straight line, because it's a dance, and the question is the dance itself, right? With not the word and, but with the word through. So how through government-supported economic development can we get more consumer freedom? I want to avoid this difficult word, yeah? And that is something that I think Singapore as a country has done time and again. If you take the Singapore Economic Board, and look it up, they do this time and again to have what we almost call state capitalism. China has also a version of it. We can criticize China a lot, but they have 400 million people going from poverty to the middle class in 15 years' time. It's amazing. And obviously there are problems in China, but we should also learn from them, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the comment I want to make on this one. And there are other examples where, now, final point, Cam, because you were asking that question in the beginning. And how could you quantify progress? Now, we have developed a software where we ask people every 3 months, every quarter, where they score themselves on the grid of 10 by 10 of the dilemma at stake. So imagine here a grid of 10 by 10. Where are you? And then the second question is, if you see progress with the previous quarter, what are the examples of, let's say, the evidence of that progress? And it works pretty well. We have done that with organizations. But the fact that you put the finger on the pulse is making sure that the company say, oh, we get a measurement again in next quarter, let's do something, because, etc. Right? In your case, I don't know, in the 35% of the people that you mentioned, if you can, because of privacy laws, really quantify it. But my advice would be, if you can quantify it, do it. We do it on the level of the dilemma itself, not personally, or like you said, but perhaps it's one of the measurements you could quantify. I believe in quantification, especially in the fluffy areas where we are. And don't forget the quote of Alfred Schutz, a phenomenologist, which is looking at social reality. He said, the big advantage of natural science over social science is that atoms and molecules don't talk back. In other words, the best quantification of social reality is involve those people and their viewpoints in measuring what they think, because that's another quote. What is defined as real is real in its consequences. And that's what I wanted to give you. The fact that it's social science doesn't mean you cannot quantify it, but the quantification needs to be different than we use in natural science. And final point, use non-parametric statistics, which is rank ordering, rather than giving it just a number. So if you have a score on, let's say, one of our dilemmas, individual versus communitarian, you cannot say if you score 10 that it's half of 20. It's a bit like temperature. You can't say that 20 degrees Fahrenheit is double the amount of 10 degrees Fahrenheit, because if you just swap it in Celsius, it's a complete different number. And that's why you need rank order statistics rather than 10 is twice 5 or 20 is half 40. you cannot do that with social science. So non-parametric statistics is the way to quantify it. Yeah, we do this all in 1 hour, but I hope it inspires you to read the book Non-Parametric Statistics by Siegel. 40 years old, but it still makes a huge impression.
Good tip.
Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
so Fons, I do see that we are at time. We did have one more dilemma, but I also
No,
understand
let's go.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna move
Yeah,
on.
because we lost so much time because of Cam. You feel
Thanks a lot,
guilty,
Cam.
Cam, I hope.
Come on.
Sense of humor is great.
He's just gonna go lay by the pool after this, so.
Yeah,
Well, I'm thinking he's gonna go snorkeling, I hope.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
it's Friday.
It's Friday.
That's Friday, okay.
My SDG was SDG 11, and I'll try and go through this while keeping it brief, being conscious of everyone's time here. Pros and cons for the private industry are on the left. Pros and cons for the government are on the bottom. And my dilemma question was: should private industry or government be the primary driver to make these cities and settlements more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable? The compromise that we came up with was sort of defined boundaries. Government does one thing, private industry does another thing, and they sort of work in parallel. The solution which we were coming up with is not a new solution. It's something that's been happening in the world. That's these public-private partnerships, P3s, getting sort of more collaboration and sort of a shared vision. We do this here in the US with airports. They've done this in Kenya with some wind farms and even in India. But it also goes back to one of my introduction questions was, what other stakeholders am I missing? Like the NGOs, how do those fit in? Like a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, how can this fit into that? So that's kind of where my struggle is. I believe I'm on the right path. What you said for Lee in his presentation, I think there's a lot of parallels to this as well. So that's where I am. Again, I would love your feedback, because there's pros that the government does, there's pros that private industry does, and I'm trying to take myself out of the lens of my first world view here in America and sort of put myself into the European sort of position, or even in Africa or in India, where maybe governments aren't as strong. How do private industries come into play, and how do these NGOs sort of collaborate with those people as well? Again, I know it's a deep one. It's tough to do in a few minutes, but love any feedback you have for me.
Great, Michael, again, wonderful. I believe with stakeholder, because this is obviously a multi-stakeholder issue, and public and private, how do you define public? Public is a lot. And for me, a lot can be learned, perhaps over the top democracy in the Netherlands. If we want to cut a tree in our own garden, we have to ask for permission, right? I mean, it's a bit over the top, especially if the tree is taking all the sun out of everything. Yeah. On the other hand, it shows how the community is involved in many projects. It takes longer, but then the end result is a very livable environment. So I would say for the stakeholder approach, and you mentioned NGOs, but also the end user, namely those who live in the cities, which is you and I. We all live, I guess, in at least in a community, and how to involve them. Because in the Netherlands, the problem is you need one citizen who can have an objection. It's almost a veto right, so it takes ages before you get there. But if you can look at, who are the stakeholders in a city, it's almost everybody. It is NGOs, it's private companies, it is the government, it is the end user, call it the citizen. How can you build up a dialogue between all of them but what we have learned in the Netherlands, and somebody at the end who takes a decision. And that could be, you know, don't forget, you have, I say you, Michael, but you know Spain, but you in America have Republicans and Democrats. We have lately 19 parties in our government that are now taking more than half a year to get a government, the next government. It's in both cases, it's extreme. Now, it's not as bad as in Russia, but 2 is perhaps little, 19 is too many. But try to get a dialogue system where more parties are representing more stakes, and then you're in great collaboration. And I love this idea within a shared vision, and that could be purpose, right? Which is often forgotten because it's the non-shared purpose which takes a very long time. Let me stop here for the moment, Michael. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because it's tough saying government support because it's so different, as you mentioned, in so many other countries. What the government does here in America is very different than the Netherlands, very different than Spain, very different than India. So it's tough to paint such a broad brush, but it really comes down to, I think, like the cultural orientations, the individualism versus collectivism, and how the balance is, because it's different in each country. You can't just copy and paste what works here and do that somewhere else. It's a very fluid sort of solution. So it's complex and it changes. You have to adapt, and it needs to be dynamic.
Yeah, and Michael, since I lived in Philadelphia a couple of years, I was impressed by because we have, in Europe, we have this idea about America, but you have to live there to know what is really going on. And I was impressed by the let's say, social engagement in especially the smaller communities around Philadelphia, and how they set up in dialogue their own environment. We can learn a lot from that as well. But really, in dialogue, you need an institution that suddenly takes a decision and says, thanks for all the input. This is what we're going to do. And if you have a democratic voted government, that's the task of the government. If they keep on listening, because sometimes I doubt if they really listen.
Yeah, they listen sometimes when it's convenient for them. They listen. So no, this is great, and I'm able to kind of synthesize some of the feedback that you provided for some others, because this is a very, sort of common theme. This dilemma. So I've been taking bits and pieces of your comments from everybody else, and hopefully my reconciliation at the end of the semester is a little more thorough. So thank you so much for joining us. We've seen your videos and learned a lot about you. Seeing you in person has been great.
No, wonderful, Michael, and it's really I like helping you. Hopefully, it's obviously with Zoom, it's a bit limited. Also, I see my camera, at least on my own, I'm not as red as I look in my own screen. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Larry. I just want to make sure we're thanking you for your time. And by the way, the last part of that is really it's a governance question. Who makes that decision? And is it a city council? Is it a planning commission? Is it a intergovernmental body? So anyway, I love your input and thoughts and reflections for the various students was terrific. I want to make sure, and before we end, on behalf of the class, I know you're a Neil Young fan, so we are sending you a copy of his book. And I just think Breaking Heavy Pieces, just that's part of what you do with corporations and the various entities you work with. So it's our gift to you. I'm so kind of glad I didn't have to carry it with me in my luggage. We'll put it in the slow post here and get it to you.
It's a heavy piece.
Yes, that's it. Very good. Another metaphor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much today, Fons, for your time and for helping our students work through these. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did.
No, to be honest, Heidi, when I saw the slides, I said, wow, first of all, I've never made such beautiful slides. And that's true for the personal introduction as well as the dilemma stuff. I learned myself in terms the SWOT analysis is a great way of doing it. And I love the output because, you know, I do this quote unquote every day. And a lot of people don't get really what a dilemma is, although they have little time and they're managers and, you know, go on with life. You obviously have and it shows a little more time to think about it. And I love the output. I really am impressed by what you did. No, well done, really.
Well, we're hoping to launch a conversation tomorrow. We are speaking with Rotterdam School of Management, and they have a MOOC on the SDGs, which is great. You know, Peter Bakker and others are all talking about this need, but nobody was talking about the dilemmas around the implementation. And that's where I thought maybe we can sort of ratchet up this conversation around combining the SDG folks with dilemma reconciliation. And so I thought maybe we will just be the start of a movement and we can get more people looking at this, because I know you did that wonderful COVID app last year. And so I sort of in my brain had this vision of an SDG app, because when we met with PricewaterhouseCoopers yesterday, and I guess that there are going to be some new regulations, EU, of course, directives that are going to make it so that companies have to report on their SDG activities. So suddenly, if you have 250 employees or more in the EU, you're going to be reporting, which means they're going to be suddenly confronted with, what the heck are these SDGs? My God, what do I have to do? And there's going to be dilemmas. And so I thought maybe this is a way to crack open that conversation.
Great. And Heidi, may I offer you, I hope Phyllis is not listening, because she hates my offerings. May I offer you our software so that you just change the text, and you can reuse our software for the dilemmas of SDG.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
that
because
would be really
it's
great.
a hassle. I mean, it's a real hassle to make that software.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so easy, but my God, it's not. So the software is there. You only need to change the content, and you can use the same methodology for an app.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I would really love that.
But think about it, because you still have to work on the questions.
Yes.
And have, because we very often ask a question on X is Y and a question on X is X, and then the app combines them, because you should not give away the dilemma when you give the questionnaire, because people always will say 10-10. While if you do separate ones, then they think, oh, here we're good and not so good, and etc. So that's what I would like to offer in return of my learning.
Yeah, and of course that it's the circular learning method now.
Here we go. And it's wonderful to see Kim and Jerry again, because I know them for a long time, and wonderful that they took the time to join.
Yeah. Well, they served as my mentors this summer, because as I said to them when Kimberly was like, well, why are you in this course? I said, because I have scheduled a meeting with Fons and I want to be prepared. And I want to prepare my students properly. So
well done.
And I feel like I have some new colleagues now.
Yes.
Good.
Exactly.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Fons. We really appreciate it. I will be sure to send you a copy of the recording. And I guess everyone can say tot ziens.
Tot ziens. Ah, you're doing so well.
To all the
Yeah.
students, your reflections are great. They're inspiring. Keep
Yeah.
going on your reflections each day. It really
All
is
right.
it's heartwarming. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Fons.
you.
Larry.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Dankjewel.
Alsjeblieft.
Tot ziens.
Thanks, Jerry. I really appreciate you being
All right.
here. That
Okay.
meant a lot to me.
See you.
Bye-bye.